Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar comic review. This is going to be my early, non-spoiler review for Avatar The Last Airbender, Ashes of the Academy. So this book is coming out March 25th, 2025. Big thank you to Dark Horse for approving my review copy request so I can bring this early review to you guys. Like I said, this will be non-spoiler. I'll mostly just be giving my opinions, having read it a few times now. And I'll go into like a little bit of kind of analysis on some of the stuff that we know from like the preview pages that are out, from the description. But, you know, if you are particularly sensitive to spoilers, maybe just stick around for the very initial opinions. The usual thing with these type of things, I'm not going to talk about the stuff that especially happens later on in the book, or even pretty much from like the halfway point on. This will be very much a discussion focused on the very early aspects of the book, just to give you a little bit more insight than perhaps just the description and some of the preview pages present. So, yeah, what this is of course, this is Avatar one-shot comic number 6. It is the end of this second one-shot trilogy that is sort of Fire Nation focused, because of course it's Azula in the Spirit Temple, the Bounty Hunter and the Tea Brewer, and this is Ashes of the Academy, with the focused characters of course being Azula, Iroh and June, but Iroh for the theme, and then this one is actually a May one-shot comic. Based on the cover, as you can see here, you might maybe be led to believe it might be more Ki focused, since it is about Ki attending the academy, but actually the character that this is focused on is May. So I'll read out the description from the back of the book, just for people who are maybe not fully up to date on what exactly is going on and just see the review and are like, hey, new comic. Ki, half-sister to Fire Lord Zuko, enrolls at the Royal Fire Academy for Girls, known for its strict curriculum and even stricter instructors. Zuko worries for Ki. When things take a turn for the worse and a seed of doubt about the new headmistress is planted, Zuko takes action by installing one of the people he trusts most, May, as an academy teacher. Can May keep a watchful eye over Ki and keep her on the right path? Or will the Academy's cruel culture shape her footsteps into those of her other half-sibling, Azula? So, obviously when this one was announced, it was met with, I think, a pretty big response, because I don't think you could have chose a better selection of characters to just grasp people's attention. Part of that is just that it's been so long since we caught up with a lot of these characters in the comics. In essence, this is part of like a Smoke and Shadow sequel, and Smoke and Shadow Part 3 came out in 2016. So we're 8, and then when it actually releases next year, 9 years after that book. It has been that long since Ki has been in a comic, since May has been properly in a comic. You know, she was in Azula in the Spirit Temple, but in the Vision sense. Same goes for like Zuko, though he was in North and South, but he wasn't the focus character in North and South. So, it's been a long time since we've addressed quite a few of these dynamics, and a lot of people got excited at the prospect of this, because finally we're going to properly explore what the Royal Fire Academy is like. We know Azula, May and Ty Lee went there. If you've read the Kyoshi novels, you know Heiran is a former headmistress, and Rangi went there, and a lot of that stuff is very valid information to think about going into this book, which is very, very cool to think about. But all these dynamics are cool. What's next for Ki as a character? How's Zuko doing as Fire Lord? What's the May and Zuko relationship like post Smoke and Shadow? All those sort of questions, because they chose the right thing to focus on. Straight away, just before I get into some of my opinions, I will just say that the usual thing I think applies with these one-shot comics, of just being aware of what the limitations are on them as one-shot comics. Because they're not trilogies anymore, it is just one book, 72 pages, covering what it can with the characters that it is using. It means that depending on what story they're trying to tell, sometimes they might have to cram it in a little bit, sometimes they have to stretch it out, and it just feels like, yeah, sometimes it would be nice if we could go back to getting, you know, 3-part stories, maybe some 2-part stories could be nice depending on what they have. The format is limiting to a certain degree, because there is a difference between a one-shot and a trilogy, obviously. And in this case, obviously, it's a May-focused comic. So that means May character focus is going to be what you're looking for here. And then you hope to get some decent stuff out of the other elements at play. But what I will say about it, getting into finally some initial thoughts, overall, there's like super non-spoiler thoughts. Overall, I really, really enjoyed this book. I do honestly think that this is probably one of, if not the best one-shot comics that we have had. Now, it helps that I am a fan of May as a character. If maybe she's not among your kind of favorite characters, or you don't are not super into her, maybe this one won't do as much for you. But I would say I do think it just is a very strong characterization and feels like very important content for May as an individual character. She is a character who definitely kind of needs it, because a lot of her arc kind of has been maybe focused on the relationship with Zuko. So part of the aim of this comic is to try and sort of explore and cover what she is doing as a character post-series. That was she always just going to be in the flower shop the whole time and that's it? And then we eventually get back around to the relationship with Zuko. You know, here we actually do some very interesting things with her, where she is brought in to be a teacher at the academy. And the question obviously comes up is, how does May adapt to that? Like, that's not necessarily something you'd think of for the character, but as we kind of go into the book, it's actually something that she really ends up quite liking. And of course, they play off the obvious dynamic that you would expect. May attended the academy when she was younger, and knows about the cruel culture there. And so because she's kind of in line with Zuko, with sort of the Fire Nation needing to sort of change and evolve going forward, you get to see her trying to sort of create a better situation for the kids at the academy now. And she believes in the sort of idea for the new academy, and very much disagrees with, you know, the headmistress sort of trying to keep things in the older style of doing things. So you get some great stuff with May, where we get to see at the same time how much the character has evolved from like as she was in ATLA. But because we also have flashback content here, we also get to see, you know, young May at the academy and how different she is from the May we saw in ATLA and the one that we have now. And a lot of those contrasts, I think, are very nicely done, because the flashback that we get here is relatively substantial. Like, you'll notice Azula is mentioned in the description. If you've seen the preview pages, you'll note that the very end of page 10 of the preview ends with going into a flashback. We get about 15, just over 15 pages of flashback involving Azula and May in the academy. So it's a pretty substantial part of the book. It's not just a quick, oh, here's a brief reference to the past. No, it's important to the book what they do here. And I think the book does a great job. Faith Erin Hicks does a great job in the writing department of, you know, using that to highlight, this is what it's like, you know, when May was there and Azula were there, and this is how the academy was like in all past eras, basically. And here's what we want it to be and why it's important to change that. And that is a fantastic dynamic, because it's a May solo comic, but the two big things in this book is May, but also the academy. The academy is, I think, properly fleshed out, world built, really effectively here. And you really do get a sense for what it's like through both the struggles to sort of change in the present day, but also how it was in the past. And so all that stuff, I think, works really nicely together. And then the book has enough, for instance, stuff like Zuko's in a decent amount of scenes. Ki, of course, is a focus, especially in the first half of the book, because it's all about her attending the academy for the first time. So she gets to be in the spotlight early on. And she's fun as well, that you get to see how, like from Smoke and Shadow, how confident of a character she is. And how very early on you really see that sort of kind of compared to what the description of the book says. Like, we're not really thinking Ki's going to kind of like fall to the cruel culture of the academy. And it's more about May as a teacher trying to facilitate things changing for the better. But Key does play a nice role in here as a kind of young character, and I think they do decent work with her also. And then just kind of as we go out through it, the rest of the book, there is good stuff with, like, say, the headmistress. Headmistress Shihan is her name. The previous headmistress is Pearl, of course. We got that from the preview pages. But Shihan is the current headmistress. There's also some nice stuff with her as a character, that you get maybe one view of her from the preview pages, but they do more with her. It's not just the standard basic villain kind of trying to keep the past kind of traditions alive. There is more to her than meets the eye, and that helps to make the book all the more interesting as well. Very much highlighting that the book is, like I said, focused on the Academy. That's why it's called Ashes of the Academy, and not Mei and Zuko kind of romance story type thing. So they're the kind of like more basic overall thoughts on the book. Getting into a few more kind of details here, of course. People are probably going to immediately ask, hey, do they do anything with Mei and Zuko and their relationship? Like, do they get back together? For spoiler reasons, I don't really want to answer the question, just because, like, if I say yes or no, or lean one way or the other, I do feel like I'm sort of spoiling an aspect of the book. All I'll say on this is, like I've talked about already, the focus is on the stuff I've talked about, and you'll note that I haven't overly talked about Mei and Zuko's relationship. It's not that it never gets addressed. From the preview pages, you can sort of see that they do interact, and there are some nice scenes between the two. But the book is ultimately not about romance. It's about other things. It's about Mei's character arc. It's about the Academy, and Zuko is there kind of involved in this to a certain degree. And I'm just going to kind of leave it at that. And we can discuss more about that when the book actually comes out, and we can talk about kind of spoilers and details like that. I'm pretty happy with overall how all that sort of stuff was actually done, but I know it is something that's going to be talked about. But again, this is why I spent a bit of time in the review sort of talking about the idea of expectations for these books. It's 72 pages, and already there's 3 kind of notable characters on the cover, plus the Academy has to be explored, and there's a flashback that takes up, like, 15 or so pages. You can sort of see the book is a little bit cramped for time with regards to exploring everything you would possibly want it to be explored. But again, it's the idea of what needs to be covered given that what the story is about versus what can be done potentially elsewhere. There's interesting kind of views, of course, you can have on that. But yes, Mei, I just think, is really well characterized in this book. As a fan of the character, I was thoroughly impressed with how Faith Erin Hicks wrote the character here. It feels consistent to me with her in the series. It feels consistent with, like, the previous comics, like Smoke and Shadow, and it's just the right next stage for her as a character. I think the decision to kind of have her be a teacher on the basis of kind of like the her interest in bugs to a certain degree, like we saw in the preview pages and stuff like that, but that, no, it's also just from a place of she actually wants things to be better. And you do get to see a more expressive side of Mei in this book, that obviously within the show, she's kind of the character who maybe doesn't express herself that much, but we can definitely see she has evolved since then to be much more willing to speak her mind, and especially when it comes to these topics of, like, let's do things the Fire Nation traditional way versus the actual new curriculum, she really does speak her mind. Again, you see a little bit of this in some of the later preview pages for the book, and that continues. There are some really, really strong moments where Mei just gets to really just go at the headmistress about, kind of, are you blind to how things have changed? Like, why does it need to be this way kind of at all times? And you really do, I think, agree with Mei and are, just happy about, like, you worded that so well. That really shows how much she has kind of grown as a character, and how they use that combined with kind of what the flashback story is about. That sort of being that, hey, it's Mei going to the Academy, and the idea of how does she come to meet and become friends with Azula for the first time. And we also get to kind of cover what Azula was like back then, and sort of what is expected, what you kind of have to do at the academy to thrive and survive. And that's what they're talking about throughout this whole thing. It's this cruel culture where they are trying to pit all the students against each other to forge them into the kind of politicians, military people, leadership positions that the Fire Nation needs, which is great sort of for the Fire Nation during a wartime, not so much when they're trying to do things in a different way in a peacetime. But again, this is where you'll note, even as going back to the Kyoshi era, so pre-Sozin, pre the kind of war Fire Lords, it's the same. Rangi talks about her time at the academy, and she doesn't think back on it too fondly. She appreciates the skills that she learned, but very clearly didn't like the way they pit the people against each other and how stressful of a situation that creates being at the academy. Her mother, Heiran, as a headmistress, all the rumors that went around, because how was the position of headmistress chosen at certain times? By Agni Kai. And you can sort of see the idea of, okay, what's being changed here? It's not just, fixing history and things that have happened since the war began and that sort of thing. It was like the people of the Fire Nation being kept in the dark about the exact scope and details of what they've done in the war. But there's also a sense of, are some of the actual core Fire Nation traditions, like parts of the culture, are they suitable for this new evolving modern world? And do we need to change more than just moving on from the Sozin, Azula, and Ozai kind of way of doing things? So there is kind of two kind of approaches here as well, and that's very, very interesting. So all of it, I think, does come together like very, very well. I think a good example of this, without going into too much detail, is that they, in the flashback, show May seeing an incident happen in amongst the other girls at the academy. And she gets to see how the headmistress at the time, Pearl, and her second in command, Shihan, handle it. Then we cut back to present day, and we begin to see basically a similar situation happen amongst some of the other students. And you get to see this really great contrast of like, May just kind of did what she needed to do to get by in the past. She really couldn't do anything in the past to stop what was happening. But now here she is as a teacher. She can step in. Does she step in, or does she let Shihan, handle things the way it was handled before? And it's such a strong moment when you get to see May kind of take over the situation. I won't go into too much details beyond that, but I just think that was a real highlight of the book, utilizing the fact that the book is heavily using this kind of flashback sequence to do that compare and contrasting. And again, it links into the idea of Shihan is more of a character. She was there in the past, she's here now, and they do more with her than just being the antagonist for this book. So that's all, I think, really nicely done. Key, like I said, the focus on her is more, I think, towards the start of the book, kind of showing her experiencing like stuff first day. We of course see from the preview pages there's the incident at the playground, basically. How that gets handled is actually quite interesting, and you begin to see like, here's some of the issues with the headmistress, and you see why Zuko feels like he needs to step in and do something. And so the book, it's all, I think, very logically written in terms of how the plot begins to come together. It obviously highlights that, like, with Key being so young, it's maybe hard to construct too much of a clear-cut arc for the character. Most of the key beats, I think, with her you probably see in the preview pages with regards to her new friend, Liwa, asking about Azula to May and stuff like that, and then just being her usual sort of like confident self, which is very fun to see. I think he is a very well written, kind of quite young character, and I'm eager to see kind of what they do with her, because of course, thinking ahead to like Avatar Studios content, she is one of the main things that is she's currently like a comic exclusive character. you're going to have to explain the existence of this character to people who maybe haven't read the comics. So the expectation is that highly likely she probably has to appear somewhere in a project somewhere, and it needs an explanation. So I'm fascinated to see how they'll go about doing that to people who aren't up to speed on everything. So there is that. Going back, I suppose, to my overall thoughts on the idea that, like I like what it is, the focus on May, the Academy, but, you know, is there kind of like maybe some of the other one-shot comics a sense that they don't have the time to do everything they need to? I would say, unlike, for instance, the Mako comic, where I do feel that needed like 5 to 10, maybe a little bit more pages to nail the arc that it had at the end, this one more feels like you could follow this up with another one-shot, but what you have here, I think, is pretty solid. It doesn't really, to me, feel like it's just flat out missing stuff. It focuses on what it needs to and does that, and there's absolutely the room to do more from here, because you know, if they just decide to focus on these characters again, they can do that. The problem, of course, is that we don't really know what the overall plan is for the comics going forward. So a lot of these plot points, it feels like, how long are we going to be putting these things on hold for? Like, are we waiting for an animated project to hit some of these big beats? Can we come back around in the comics? When the animated stuff starts, can we go back to trilogies? Can we open up and do bigger stories? They're sort of the questions that we have here, because I think it's at this point, you know, 2024 going into 2025 for Avatar, looking ahead to 2026 when it's going to all start, kind of feels like a bit unacceptable that we're stopping whole plot points for potentially like 8+ years at a time. We need to be able to kind of come back to this stuff when required. But like I said, I'm very pleased overall with what this book covers in its 72 pages. It feels as kind of close to complete as one of these books, I think, has, where I think some of the earlier one-shots definitely started out on the lighter side of things, where you can tell they maybe had to stretch the story to fit the page count. They've gotten more into the situation, realizing the stories need to be a bit more impactful. But now they're maybe experiencing the other problem of, we need to almost compress a story into these 72 pages because they don't seem to have the ability to do like a 2-part book or do a sequel to a book like somewhat quickly afterwards. So there's still that whole thing that I think continuously surrounds the kind of current era of comics, but hopefully the door will be opened up when they start to announce a lot of the Avatar Studios projects and they ramp up publishing like we know is going to happen. Hopefully we know what the plan is for a lot of this stuff, because if we got books like this a little bit more regularly, I think we'd be in a very good spot, because I think this is kind of this is the level that I really want from the one-shot comics, is doing stuff like this, kind of like the Mako comic did as well, like Azula in the Spirit Temple did. They've found, I think, the right general approach for these one-shot comics, even if there is still some frustrations for me with the format overall. But hopefully things will improve. So, overall, kind of wrapping up the review there. Of course, in the comments, ask me questions about the book. I'll attempt to answer them as best I can without giving away spoilers and stuff like that. Because again, I don't really want to talk about stuff that happens, like especially in like the second half of the book. All I'll say about that is that there is actually some stuff that this book does when it actually, I think, fully opens up and reveals its plot that really did surprise me. I'm like, whoa, wait, that's kind of the underlying plot here? That's kind of crazy and interesting, and I did not expect it, but it's actually quite clever. And that's all. I'll leave that stuff on. I'm very eager to talk about this book, full spoilers, but we will have to wait until the end of March, of course, to do that. So, yes. As a May fan, I was very impressed with what we got here. She is particularly well written in this one, and there's so many great moments that she gets to have here. The flashback sequence is, I think, very good. Azula, I suppose maybe Azula is maybe the final topic to go into a little bit. Azula is presented as I think very in line with the way previous iterations of like young Azula is presented, where like she is still that kind of calculating, kind of cruel self, but you can sort of see that the Academy definitely accentuates and amplifies some of those aspects of her, explaining why one of the first scenes in the book is sort of Ursa kind of noting, like, I'm worried about Ki going to the Academy because to a certain degree, I don't think Azula was helped by going to the Academy. That I feel I sort of lost any hope of kind of helping her when she went to the Academy. Like Ozai's influence plus the Academy's influence meant I there was very little I could do type situation. And I think that's made clear, that the plot of the book is sort of, we need to stop the Academy from effectively being an academy that's there to make more Azulas type thing. Obviously, Azula is the whole what they want taken to an extreme, but that whole idea, that's not what we need in the modern day. And I think they do it quite well, where to a certain degree, Azula in the Spirit Temple is the kind of Azula internal side of things, where you get to see more of the kind of maybe sympathetic sides to her, whereas this is more the other side of things. How does May initially view Azula? How does she view her from the present day looking into the past? That whole sort of thing. So pretty good stuff overall. So yeah, I'm very pleased with what we have here, but in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.